So today I'm going to be talking about how to use SPSS. Here we have what you're going to see when you first open SPSS and you have a blank file. So this would be a new file. The top one here, where we have data view, is going to show you the variables across the top of your file. So each different variable, maybe you have age, gender, ethnicity, whatever else you're collecting will be across the top here. And then each row, these numbers on the left, will be one individual case. So this could be one person, one response group, this could be one school if you're collecting information from schools. So each row is one case. Whoops, if we look down here to variable view, to get to that, you'll just click on the tab that says variable view. So you have two views on this main screen, the data view and the variable view. The variable view gives you the formatting options for each variable. So your variable name will appear in the left column here. These variable names have to have no spaces and no numbers, or they can't start with a number, sorry. So a lot of times you'll see people using an underscore instead of a space in these names, and you want to keep these names short. Next we have the type. So this just gives you numeric, so that would be numbers, string, that would be like open-ended questions if you're going to type in a whole response. You can also change it to dollars if you're using money, or dates. The width we're not going to worry too much about. That'll automatically update as we need it. And the decimals, that's just showing how many decimal places in each value. So if you want to have 4, you can type in 4. If you want to have 0, you can put in 0. It really depends on your variable. The label is a more descriptive summary of what your variable is. So a lot of times this name's going to be super short. So you might have, let's say you're going to do, like in the homework you have COMP_1. And then this label will tell you what that means. So I believe it means total computer score for some specific area of computer knowledge. Next, you have the values. So this is where you'll put in values for nominal and ordinal variables. So when you have a nominal variable of male and female, in the data view, you can show it as a 1 for male and 2 for female, or 1 for female and 2 for male. And then those values, 1 and 2, you'll put into this value area. So when you run any analyses in SPSS, it'll show you what those values stand for. Missing, you can put in missing values here. So if someone skipped a question and you put in a value to show that they did not answer that question, usually 999 is used a lot for missing values, you'll put that in this section. Columns we don't worry about, alignment we don't worry about, and row we don't worry about. But measure here, that's going to have your options of nominal, ordinal, or scale. So again, scale is the same thing as continuous, and then remember your book breaks down continuous into interval and ratio. So interval and ratio are the same thing as continuous, and continuous is the same thing as scale. So just remember that for this part here. So now if we're looking at the file menu option, there's a few things we'll use. So new, you can open a brand new data set. Open, you'll be using to open the data files for your homework assignment. I recommend that you open SPSS first and then open the data file once you have SPSS open. Sometimes SPSS gets finicky and it doesn't want you to open the data file just by clicking on it in your downloads. The other options here, syntax. If you're working in the future and using the syntax language, which we're not using in this course, you can open a new file here and then output. We will be using output in this. So whenever you run an analysis, a new output window will pop up with the results of that analysis. And I'll show you that in a minute. Open database is where you can open new files such as Excel, Access, and DBase files. We won't be doing that in here, but if your organization that you're working for uses those formats, you can open them this way. And then reading text data, if you have a .txt file or a .csv file, you can open them that way in SPSS. If you click this display data file information, you can get a code book for your working or external file that you're using. So that would include variable names, their labels, the category values, and names, and other formatting things. And then some of the rest of these are self-explanatory, like recently used or recently used files. We're not going to be using repository, switching server, caching data, and renaming data sets, so don't worry too much about those. This is also where you'll come to save your files. So when you do work, you're going to want to save all of your work. So if you need to go back and change something, you can. So this is where you'll save files. Next, moving over to the Edit tab. So if we move over there, there are a number of options that you'll see. So we have, you can insert a new variable, insert some cases. There's other ways to do that, which you'll see in the application part of today. Finding things, we're not going to use those too much, but they're there. The other thing is that options. So pivot tables, if you click on that, it'll just show you different options. You can actually format the tables to come out in APA style, which is really awesome. And it's academic is the way that APA style will come up in your output files then. General has some other settings you may want to play around with a little bit. And then output labels. So you want to have both outline labeling and pivot table labeling, which was right here, these two options. So the default would be these, what are listed here, which is what we're probably going to be using the most through the class. But if you want to change them, you can. Just make sure you click the apply button and then the OK button. I would not recommend playing around with any of these other things just because I'm not able to fix things like this for you if something gets messed up in your information, but pivot tables, general, and output labels are pretty simple to change back and forth. Next, moving over to the data menu option. This includes identifying duplicates, sorting your cases. So if you want to sort by male first and female second, or if you want to sort by youngest to oldest or oldest to youngest. This is very similar to the A to Z sorting function in Excel, if you're familiar with that. Sorting variables, so that would be in your variable view, you would be able to sort by the different variables. Transpose we're not going to use, but this would be switching your variables and cases, so it gets very confusing. Merging files, if you have multiple years of data and you want to put them together into one data file, you can use this merge file option. We're not going to use restructuring or aggregating. Copying the data set, we'll just, again, make a copy. We will be using this split file and select cases option. So splitting the file by a categorical variable, so either a nominal or ordinally measured variable, will show you in the output the responses split by that variable. So if we're going to split a file by gender, you'll have results for those who are female and those who are male separately in that output. The select cases function, if we use that, you're going to say we want to select only those cases that scored above a 65 on some exam. So if you click on to select cases, it'll give you a couple options of how to choose who you want to select. And then when you do that, it'll filter out all of the other cases that don't meet that selection criteria. And in your output for any analyses you run, it will only show the summaries for that people, or those cases you selected. And you'll have to remember to turn this off after you use it. So we'll talk about that more later in this class, but make sure that you always turn it off after you run for both the split file and the select cases. Otherwise, they'll stay split or selected when you run additional analyses. Moving on to the transform option. So here you can compute a variable, which you will need to do in your homework. So computing a variable brings up a new pop-up screen where on the top left you'll have a variable, you'll type in a new variable name, and then there will be a box to put in your equation to calculate that new variable from variables that already exist. The count values within cases just counts the missing values. We're not going to use that, or shift values. Something that is very, very important to remember is when you are recoding variables, you always want to use this recode into different variables option. Because if you recode into the same variable, it will overwrite that original data and you cannot get it back without starting over. So always recode into different variables. And you will need to do this for your homework as well. So then we have these other things here. We're not going to use any of these in this class, but they are options for you to have in the future. The automatic recode, ranking your cases, the date and time wizard if you are inputting date and time information. Also, if you want to have a random number generated for sampling purposes, there's a random number generator in SPSS you can use. Next is the big kahuna, the analyze menu option. So in this option, this is where you'll be going the majority of the time. So reports just gives you very general overview of information, and we won't really be using that in this class. The most frequent place we're going to go is going to be analyze, descriptive statistics, frequencies. But also in here is a descriptives tab, cross tabs, which we'll be using. The rest of these we won't be using very often in this descriptive statistics tab. But then we'll be using compare means in the future. We will not be using the general linear model in this class, but you have options to run different tests. The correlate we'll be using, regression we'll be using in the future. Dimension reduction we're not using, but that's where you would do a factor analysis. Scale could get you reliability coefficients. Non-parametric tests we'll be using that last day of class this semester. If you're ever doing a survival analysis, you can use SPSS for that. Or if you want to do a missing value analysis, which we're not doing in this class, but again, there's a ton of options here. We're only going to be learning some of the basic ones that are most frequently used in the field for this class. Next is the graph chart. So here you can get all those different graphs that we talked about 2 weeks ago. A bar chart, a line graph, an area chart, a pie chart, box plots, scatter plots, and histograms. There's also an option for histograms in that Analyze Descriptive Statistics Frequency tab, which I'll show you later. And you can also build different charts if you get excited about making a specific chart. So those are all your options here. Again, we won't be using a lot of this in this class, but if you want to play around with it, it is here. And then utilities, this variables part is very similar to the file where it gave you a summary of the code book. So it will again list your variable name, a list of them, and their values and labels for the categories. Finally, the help option. This is a good place to go if you're stuck. So in topics, you can look for topics of interest. So if you're looking, forget how to do a frequency in the future, you can click on topics and type in frequency and it'll come up with how to do it. Tutorial will give you a tutorial of those different topics. So you may wish to click on that instead of the topics because it'll actually show you how to do different things. Case studies and statistics coach are kind of helpful for learning different things in SPSS in the future. We're not going to use them in this class, but if you want to go into them, have fun. Then this command syntax reference, I mentioned in the file tab, there's that syntax window that you can use. This is where you would come to learn the different syntax commands. In my old job, I used this all the time to try and figure out how to do what I wanted the data to do for me. So we used a lot of syntax at my old job, but it gets very complicated and very confusing, and it's a whole programming language you need to learn. So we're going to stick to these drop-down menus because they're much easier and much less confusing. If after you use those top two topics and tutorial options and you're still confused, one, you can email me. You can post in the discussion board for the class, or you can search the topic in Google. I use Google all of the time to help me remember different things about SPSS, or if something's not working, to kind of troubleshoot how to fix it. So feel free to use Google. I know that sounds kind of funny, but it does help. And one of the big things at my old job that we used to do all the time, and it makes me laugh now, is we would Google all sorts of things about how to transform data because we didn't have a guidebook for our department. All right, that's all for this lecture. So now the Intro to SPSS activity is another video, and this you can work along with and have SPSS open on your computer while you're watching it and type in the data and go through the practice activities if you want to, or you don't have to, but I would recommend doing it so that you are not confused.